Okay, I think you have to.
Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, so if I move the slide, can you still see that?
Yes.
Okay, okay, great. Thanks for giving me this chance. And I noticed that we have 27 minutes left. I try to my best to fit in time. My name is Duke, and I'm going to talk about penalty lottery. I really enjoyed the previous two talks about the affirmative action and discriminations, and I feel like my paper is kind of off topic, but I'm sure that this paper will be entertaining. Because I'm going to say something insane. Um, the main purpose of this paper is to sell a new idea, uh, uh, something new. I'm going to say something new and perhaps insane and never implemented before. But uh, if you find that they find system that is uh, covered in this news article makes sense to you, then I could perhaps say that my suggestion, at least theoretically and experimentally, works better. So the title of this news article said the fill-in to home of the more than $100,000 speeding ticket. This is because that there are some Scandinavian countries determines the size of the fine based on the offender's daily income. So that's the word that the name day fine system is coming from. The size of the fine is proportional to the daily income. If you find that is appealing to you, then let's see how I can go further. Let me get to the question. By the way, due to the time limits, I'll mostly talk about the theoretical side of it, although you may have lots of questions about the realistic implementation of my suggestion. But well, I am happy to discuss it later after the presentation. But for now, just to think about my presentation as a theoretical entertainment or science fiction. Uh, so I consider very simple sequential public bad production situation under imperfect monitoring for punishment. So at each time, one citizen in the queue decides whether to produce a public bad for his own sake. In this case, he earns benefit DI or not. In this case, he needs to pay uh, some cost of not producing a public bad. And the probability that his action is monitored is imperfect, is P less than 1. And the public bad production incurs some negative externality. The person who produced the public bad and got monitored with probability P must pay the fine, whose size is F, that compensates the social cost induced by the negative externality. So here I allow that the benefit could be subjective and the cost could be subjective, but the nominal size of the fine is just exactly equal to the social cost. And I maintain the assumption that the government or the social planner or the policymaker correctly calculates the size of the social cost associated with the public bad production. So the size of the fine is normatively fixed. And needless to mention Becker's seminal economics of crime studies, if the expected utility of producing public bad is exceeding the expected utility of not producing a public bad, then it's better off by wrongdoing. And I assume that this is true for all individuals. Here's my research question. Given that the probability monitoring capacity, P, cannot be easily changed, and the changing the nominal size of the fine is unjustifiable because, like I said, we assume that we know that the exact social cost is associated with the public bad production. Is there a way to control public bad productions? And I'm going to say there is. To illustrate what I'm going to do, I translated the previous slide in this figure. Although the model by itself can be applied to many general situations of sequential public bad productions under imperfect monitoring for punishment, for better illustration, I'll just focus on the situation of problem of conducting a misdemeanor, like a parking violation. So you decide whether to violate the parking law or just abide by the law. So at time period T, a citizen I arrives and decides whether to abide by the law or violate the law. If citizen abides by the law, then he needs to pay the cost of abiding by the law. If he violates the law, then with probability P, his action is monitored and he needs to pay the fine. So this is the final payout. And with probability 1 minus P, his action is not monitored, so he can enjoy B. And next period, this new citizen comes in. By the way, for terminological clarity, I will say the citizen who decides to violate the law are wrongdoers, and those who got monitored and got ticketed are violators. So violators are a proper subset of the wrongdoers. Okay, so this is the current rule of the game. And here I add one randomization device here, which I call the penalty lottery. Those who, the violator who decides to violate the law and got monitored with probability Q is free to go with the accumulating the fine to the public account. So he still enjoy the benefit BI. But with the probability 1 minus Q, he or she becomes the winner of the penalty lottery and pays all the accumulated fines accumulated in the society. And the new accumulation of the fine becomes 0. Okay, so the current rule of the game is nested as a special case with the Q equals to 0. And I assume that this accumulation of the fine is commonly known. And it starts from the 0 accumulation. So basically, I add the randomization here. Okay. Any questions regarding this? But I know that the first response whenever I present this one is this. Within 25 minutes presentation, I think it's wasting time to cover the preview of the result and come back to the result in 10 minutes. But I'll just mention one thing. It is true that this penalty lottery asymptotically achieved the steady state where no one is willing to produce public bets because the large number of accumulated fines. But this property is neither the main advantage of the penalty lottery nor the main claim that I want to raise. So honestly, I get tired of the questions like, oh, hey, I got your point. So eventually the society accumulates the sufficiently large number of fines in the public account. So no one is willing to produce public bets. If that is the natural long-run equilibrium, then why don't you just think about the excessive amount of fine from the very beginning? The short answer is that because that's not the point that I want to raise. And practically, that steady state is really takes a long time to reach. And we need to focus on the short-run dynamics. And I'll get back to this point later. But please have that in mind. I'll skip the literature for the sake of time. And I'll come back to the model. And this is just a recapitulation of what I just showed you in the graph. So I'll just go faster. There are n citizens indexed by I, and the citizen sequentially arrives at time t. By the way, I just said the sequential timing is cyclical, just to have a consistency with the experimental setup and this model, but it doesn't necessarily be that cyclical. So the whole point, what I'm going to say is that the one citizen arrives at time, discrete time. And like I said, the expected benefit, expected utility of violating the law or expected utility of producing public bets is exceeding the expected utility of abiding by the law or not producing the public bet. So now I had the probability Q, the penalty lottery parameter. With probability Q, a violator, again, the violator is the one who decides to violate the law and got monitored. It's not asked you to pay the fine, but the fine is added to a public account. And the F of t is the accumulated fines at time t, at the beginning of time t. And with the probability 1 minus q, the violator becomes the winner of the penalty lottery and pays all the accumulated fines, including his or hers. So each citizen's decision is simplified in this bullet point. At time t, a citizen faces to choose bi or minus ci, with knowing that the probability of paying ft plus f is p times 1 minus q. So here p is the monitoring capacity, probability that his action is monitored, and 1 minus q is the probability that he becomes the winner of the penalty lottery. Again, the typical goal is nested as a special case with q is equal to 0. And I assume that the local government's goal is to minimize public bad production. Of course, that the local governments have different objective function in their mind. So I'm happy to discuss it later if time permits. As you can see, I allow lots of heterogeneities here. So each citizen may have subjective benefit, subjectively evaluating their benefit, or subjectively evaluating their cost of avoiding by the law. And the utility functions may have different shapes, right? And the government or the planner cannot observe any of them. But still, the good thing is that we can elicit their willingness to produce public bets. What I mean by that is that for any so if there is some point for each individual that the accumulated size of the fine is exceeding a certain threshold, then the citizen will not violate the law. And I am skipping how I calculate this, but this ki is now the index that capturing the upper bound of citizen i's threshold level. And simply speaking, if citizen I has the ki equals to 2, then if the fine more than or equal to 2 fines are accumulated in the public account, then the citizen I will not violate the law. So naturally, this ki is interpreted as a degree of willingness to produce public bets. And for the terminological clarity, I'll just set the k upper bar as the maximum of such ki, and g of k is the distribution of ki. And I'll show you 2 propositions and 1 corollary. So the first proposition is that there exists a steady state, and indeed an observing state. Let PVT be the accented probability that a violation is observed after t periods. If we adopt the penalty lottery Q somewhere between 0 and 1, such probability is monotone decreasing in t. So eventually it'll approach to 0. In words, the society will consecutively accumulate k upper bar fines eventually. So I just show you one sample path that the society accumulates 1 fine and someone pays it. Society accumulates this amount of fine and someone pays it. And after some dynamics, there's some point the society reach this high level of accumulation at the fine. And yeah, this is robust to any heterogeneity of the population. But again, this is not this point and beyond is not the main advantage of the penalty lottery, nor the main claim that I want to raise. because the time period from here to here is substantially long. So this long run comes in a very, very long way. That's why I argue that we need to focus on the short run dynamics. The second proposition clarifies that how long the time period is reaching the steady state. So I'm not going to cover all the details, but it says that the expected number of time periods reaching the steady state where no one violates law because of the sufficient amount of fine is accumulated in the society is described by this. And as you can see that this Q is on the denominator, Q to the power of I goes from 0 to K upper bar minus 1. So if K upper bar is say 10, and Q is 0.5, then 0.5 to the 9. So 1 over 0.5 to the 9 is excessively large. So any tiny bit of heterogeneity comes in this society, then the expected number of time periods reaching the steady state is exponentially increasing. And that's why you can just argue that it's practically impossible to reach the steady state. And so naturally followed question is that, okay, so if we look at the short run dynamics rather than the long run equilibrium, long run property, then is it still penalty lottery beneficial to have that? My answer is yes, because this provides a very simple mechanism that asks each citizen to reveal their true willingness to violate the law. Okay, in each time they made a decision based on the accumulation of the fine, and they decide whether to violate the law or abide by the law. So although the government or the social planner or policymaker cannot observe any of the idiosyncratic heterogeneities of each individual, they reveal their true willingness to violate the law. Therefore, the ex ante expected fines for an individual with KI is increasing with their willingness to violate the law. So this works as a very simple mechanism that assigns a larger expected fines for those who are more willing to violate the law or more willing to produce public bans. There are many hypothetical predictions based on this corollary, but I'll just mention two things, this one and this one. Compared to the very risk-averse citizen who's, no, I don't think I will need this. For those, comparing to those who are very risk-averse, more risk-seeking person, let's say that the risk-neutral person, will have the larger willingness to violate the law because that the risky side, that the probability that his action is monitored and the probability that he becomes the winner of the penalty lottery is less appealing to the more risk-seeking person. So the person will have the larger K of willingness to violate the law. And those are endogenously accepting larger ex ante expected fines. So without eliciting risk preferences, this penalty lottery assigns the larger expected fines for those who are more risk-seeking people. In this context, the risk-seeking behavior is more violation. And I previewed in the very beginning a day fine system. I claim that the penalty lottery at least works better than the day fine system. This is because that the main, at best, the main advantage of the day fine system is that it assigns a larger fines to those who have perhaps the current nominal size of the fine is subjectively evaluated as very low. Like if you're super rich, if you're owner of the CEO of the farms, then you may find that the current speeding ticket is relatively smaller than your subjective benefit. So the wealth level or the daily income level is the proxy of the larger benefit over the fine, then if that is the case, then the penalty lottery assigns those who finds that the benefit over fine is larger, assigns the larger expected fines. So in the sense that the day fine system exogenously gives the rich people to larger fine, this penalty lottery allows the rich people to accept larger ex-ante expected fines. So, but this is not the thing I test. I mostly test this one in the lab. I have 6 minutes, so good to go. So I had a quick, simple experiment. Why? I want to test it, and I don't want to bother policymakers. I avoid using wrongdoing, violations, fines, misdemeanors, etc. Instead, I use the arguably neutral words, red ball, corresponding to abiding by the law, blue ball, violating the law, and black sticker, which is corresponding to the fine. And the procedure is very corresponding to the theory. There are 60 rounds and everyone is endowed with 100 tokens, and they are randomly assigned to groups of 4, and one member makes a decision in each round in a cyclical manner. So in each group of 4, one member makes 15 decisions. A subject in his turn chooses either a red ball or blue ball with knowing that how many black stickers, the size of the fine accumulated in the common pool. And if the subject chooses the red ball, then the turn ends. If he chose a blue ball, then with probability 0.7, his action is not monitored. And with probability 0.3, his action is monitored. So a black sticker is followed. But this black sticker is added to the common pool with the probability Q. So it's just the fine is added to the common pool. With the other probability 1 minus Q, he keeps all the black stickers in the common pool. So with probability 1 minus Q, he becomes the winner of the penalty lottery. So the main treatment is that I vary this Q. A red ball, the abiding by the law, is worth -1 token. A blue ball, violating the law, is worth +5 tokens. A black sticker, a fine, is worth -8 tokens. And after the main experiment, I measured their risk preferences. Okay. And like I said, the experimental design is very simple. I just varied this Q. The NQ, medium Q, I set the probability of handing over their fine to the common pool as 0.5, and LQ, low Q treatment, I set this one as 0.1. So roughly speaking, you can just see this one as the penalty lottery treatment, and LQ as the close to the current rule of the game. And I didn't use Q equal to 0 because the number of regions, but I argue that this one is closer to the standard current rule of the game, and MQ as the penalty lottery. And I have very limited amount of time. So I measured that the individual's risk preferences using called the bomb risk elicitation task. And I wouldn't spend time for this, but this is incentivized one-shot task to elicit their risk preferences. It's very robust, it's well executed. And the result is this, as predicted in the penalty lottery, the proportion of people who abide by the law increases compared to this LQ treatment. And people are corresponding to the number of common stickers in the public account, number of black stickers in the common pool pretty well. So again, this number of black stickers in the common pool is corresponding to the number of fines accumulated to the public account. And the more accumulated fines, the more people abiding by the law. And this is just a regression that shows that my result is robust. And one good thing that I want to say in the remaining 1 or 2 minutes is that now the risk-seeking behavior doesn't pay anymore. Remember that this is the scattered plus and the faded lines of earnings in the red ball blue ball game, and the number of boxes collected in bread. So although I didn't introduce the bread test, you can just interpret that the small number of boxes collected is corresponding to the risk avoiding behavior, and the large number of boxes is associated with the risk-seeking behavior. Okay, so in the standard rule of the game, you see the trend. The more risk-seeker is earning more because they are violating the law more frequently, and there's no way to penalizing them under the current system. But in this penalty lottery situation, more risk-seeking people is no longer get paid more than risk-averse people. How much time do I have? 1 minute. Okay, so the argument of this is that because in the experiment I control the benefit and cost and the size of the fine are controlled. So the main heterogeneity comes from the risk preference, individual risk preferences. And the more risk-seeking people will have the more willing to produce, will have the larger value, more willing to produce public bets. So they will violate the law whenever there are a small number of black stickers accumulated in the pool and a larger amount of black stickers accumulated in the pool, so that results in a more volatile earnings, and they are voluntarily accepting larger expected fines. So the earnings variance of the top half risk-seeking subject is significantly larger than that of the bottom half ones. So as you can see, so if you see the half line through, then the upper half, the earnings variance is larger than the earning variance of this. Meanwhile, the standard rule of the game, the earnings variance of the risk-seeking people is similar to the risk-averse people. And with the penalty lottery, a high risk brings even a higher volatility in payouts, and they're accepting larger expected fines. So their evil action doesn't pay. So I'll wrap it up. I know policymakers will not and cannot adopt the penalty lottery right away, but it is simple for citizens to understand and easy to implement, and it doesn't require a huge structure change nor ask the policymakers to measure every individual heterogeneities. It's at least better than the day fine system. Yeah. And again, I'm not arguing that the main goal of this is to put the excessive amount of fine. The penalty lottery is still good in short-run dynamics because citizens reveals their willingness to produce public bet, and the expected fines increases in their willingness. I have some discussion slides, but I will stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So, Subhashish had a quick question. So,
okay.
No, actually, I wrote already in the chat window, if you can see, and we can discuss later. Already I'm past time, so we can discuss later.
okay. In that case, let's take a break, and then we will start keynote speaker talk at